Hey cats and kittens, Dr. Big Ed, your guitar pedal shrink. So today, we're going to talk about guitar modeling, something we haven't talked about before. But as I mentioned in last week's video, I had an opportunity finally, due to the lockdown, to explore some guitar modeling devices more than I ever had before. I've used them before, somewhat wrote them off, not entirely, but my experience was only semi-positive. And then one of the records we did during the beginning of the lockdown, we had started it before, but we finished it during, was a record that we did all the guitars through the Strymon Iridium, and we all loved it. We all thought, there's nothing wrong with this. I mean, we went right from our pedal boards to the Strymon Iridium, and boom. So that made me reevaluate it a little bit. So what about those pedal board modelers that have multiple effects? So I got myself a Line 6 Pod Go. I've had the HX Effects. I've had the HX Stomp. The HX Stomp is a little bit more in line to this because the HX Effects doesn't have amps. So I was somewhat familiar with the Line 6 topography. Really dug into that. And then that got me curious. So each of the devices that I'm talking about here, I've had at least a week to spend with, if not more. This isn't going to be, I'm not going to be playing through any of them and doing all that because there's tons and tons and tons of tutorials on the web about that. I know, I watched them all. That's how I would help figure out all these things, or at least get me started. I'm just going to give you my working man musician's everyday unvarnished opinion. As you know, I work 24/7, 365 days a year, full-time musician. I don't do demos for money. I don't sell insurance. This is it, folks, for better or worse. So for about 30 years now. So what do I think? So as far as sound goes, we'll start with that. The Pod Go, and you can throw the HX Stomp and Helix and LT and all this in there, has a little bit of a leg up. Maybe a little bit more than a little bit of a leg up. And that's not to demean what the other devices do. It's just that right out of the box, they have a leg up. Why is that? Well, the amps, and more specifically, the amp cabs, the stock ones that Line 6 puts in the Pod Go, HX Stomp, Helix, everything, are a little bit better. They're not just better and more representative of the actual amps that they're emulating, but they have more useful tweakability, not just on the hardware itself, but in the app, and we'll get to the apps later. The app is really useful in devices like these. So, and for instance, you know, in the Line 6, and with the others too, you can go in and you can tweak mic distance, mic choice, early reflections, low cut, high cut, and of course, you can do IRs. Now you can do IRs in the Mooer GE300, but it's called tone capture. And tone capture is a whole nother thing. You're actually capturing an amp or a cab through its basically a sampling device. And it's a very tricky thing. I'll get to that later. So for ease of use, more realistic right out of the box, line 6 pod go. However, and this is going to be a really interesting, weird, tweaky thing, but on the higher strings of my instrument, I found that the Mooer GE300 was a little bit less pingy, a little bit less hyped. So it was a little bit more realistic on the top 2 strings in particular, on the unwound strings. Whereas on the wound strings, line 6 was more realistic. Just worked out that way. And I tried it several times, ABC. Now the Zoom, I love Zoom products. So don't get me wrong, I love Zoom products. I love the tweakability of them. There's apps. Their app has really improved in the last few years really well. There's also Gadwin ToneLib, which is a great app that's free. Amazing to work with their devices. One of my faves of all time are the MS-50G, where you can have 6 effects at once in a single footprint pedal, and the MS-70 CDR. So no prejudice there. I'm a big fan. Let me tell you something else. As far as realism, capturing the exact amps as you may know them, maybe the Zoom won't be for you. Maybe it will. But as far as getting wicked cool sounds out of the Zoom using the app and tweaking them, not really thinking about, oh, I'm going for an AC30 or, Dr. Z or whatever, and that's all in there. But I found, okay, if I'm not thinking about that and I'm just going for really cool sounds from my particular instrument, like tuning it to the instrument, the Zoom was great. It was really great. And there's 3, oh man, there's more than 3. I tried the the G3Xn, and there's the 9, and then there's the 11, which is the big one, which is really competing with the Helix. And that's the other thing we need to get out of the way, is that price point is a factor here. Now, why? Because, well, the HX Stomp is more than the Pod Go. The Mooer GE300 is, at least 150 more than the Pod Go, but it's really competing with the Helix, right? Because you can get more effects, and it's got the dual chip, and et cetera, et cetera. The Zoom is cheaper than all of them at each particular price point for what unit they're going after. The Zoom G3X or GX3N, whatever it is, I always get it wrong. That one, you can only do 7 effects at a time. The 9, you can do 9, and the 11, you can do 11. That's really cool. But as long as you're getting the sounds you want. The Mooer GE300 has a lot more available effects than the Pod Go. But then again, it's not really competing with the Pod Go, is it? Because the Pod Go's significant. At retail price, it's significantly cheaper. I think the Mooer came down a little bit in price, so it's still $150 more, but it used to be a lot more. It used to be like $250 more. So what works for you? So here's what I got from, so the foot treadle, the expression foot treadle volume expression wah on the Pod Go works great. You press it down, toe first, you get the wah, and you press it again and you're back to volume pedal. It's the same in the Mooer and the Zoom. The Zoom doesn't have the press feature. Let me stop right there. The Zoom doesn't have the press feature. If you want the wah, you'd have to press a preset for the wah and assign it to when it's assigned to when the volume pedal is active. So then it goes from volume pedal to expression, but it's the same principle. The Mooer, when you press down, you have to assign these. So the difference between the Pod Go and the Mooer is the Mooer has to be assigned in the expression assign. You have to calibrate the expression pedal. That was a little tricky. I had to calibrate it 4 or 5 times to get it right. When I finally got it right, it was fine. But I should note that the toe down is really sensitive. Where on the Pod Go, you have to give it, in my opinion, the right amount of press to engage the wah. On the Mooer, you can just be doing a volume swell and accidentally trigger the wah very easily. So that's something to watch out for. However, the treadle, just the feel of the expression volume in the Mooer, I actually liked a little bit better than the Pod Go. Not that there was anything wrong with the Pod Go. I just liked the feel of the Mooer a little bit better. But that super sensitivity, I found myself triggering it very, very often at the wrong time when I didn't really want to. So that's something to look out for. I didn't try the effects loop on the Zoom because I had the cheaper Zoom, which didn't have the effects loop. The 9 and the G11 may have an effects loop. In fact, I think they do, but I didn't have those units to test. But the Mooer GE300 and the Pod Go both have effects loop. I like to run certain stutter, glitch, loopy, micro thingy, my own little program thingies in the loop. Because I find that, from the Drolo Stamen to the Red Panda Tensor to the Count to 5 by Montreal Assembly, you're not going to find those in a modeling multi-effect device. Just ain't going to happen. You can try to assimilate a sort of kind of try, but no. So the Mooer GE300 as an effect loop sounds really good. I always run a buffer at the beginning of my pedals in the effect loop anyway, so I didn't notice any loss there, but it sounded great. It also sounds great in the Pod Go. Okay, so let's talk about effects. If the Pod Go is a little bit better with amplifiers, at least on overall, but definitely on wound strings, and the Mooer is just below that, but definitely below that, and also because I think the Mooer cabs are weaker than the built-in Line 6 cabs, and Line 6 with the app is much, much easier to import custom bought IRs. You have to do that with the tone capture. So if Line 6 has a little bit of little bit, like the amps were great in the Mooer. They were really great. It was the cabs that were lacking. The Pod Go had great amps and cabs. But I could go with the amps in either. So if you're willing to deal with tone capture and capture an IR to deal with that in the Mooer, fine. The Mooer, again, so effects. The Mooer has more available effects. More available. So you've got a synth engine, which is really cool. And guess what? It tracks great. It's pretty cool. Very easy to tweak. Then you have choices of compression, just like everything else. You've got effects A, which is what you can choose to put in effects A. You then have an OD distortion. You can pick from their, coterie of stuff there. You have the tone capture. You have effects B. You have amp cab. You have effects loop. And effects A and effects B, you can pick whatever you want to pick to put in there. However, you do not have choices of reverb. Like I wanted to put a second reverb in there so I could save room on my effects loop board that's running in the effects loop. No, you have one choice of delay and a whole bunch of other effects like, rotary and phaser and a lot of modulation. You have EQs, ring mod, tremolo. No second reverb. And considering that it has the dual chip like the Helix, you can do that in Helix, as long as you don't run out of CPU. So they're not even giving you that option. That was pretty disappointing. The other thing that was disappointing is, and then you have your regular delay and reverb. You have a noise suppressor. That's its separate own slot, right? The disappointing thing was, frankly, the effects kind of sound like ass, really. Like, I found one or two reverbs I could live with. The distortion reverb was really cool, but not like real, like crisp and three-dimensional. It just had a cool sound. But for instance, the mangled verb on my Eventide is like light years better than this distorted verb. But it's cool to have. And their haul was pretty okay. The rest of them, meh. The delays, totally meh. Ring mod was good. Cool thing about the wahs, you can program, like you can do custom wah, so you can pick your own frequency scale and then Q, which is what I did. But they have other choices that they have of their own that you can tweak. But generally speaking, other than the overdrives actually sounded really good and worked really well, and I'm using a couple of them in presets. But in general, they sound like ass. Whereas the effects in the Line 6, awesome. The reverbs are insane, highly tweakable, again, with the app or on the hardware. Amazing, like all the effects. I mean, I've used Line 6 effects for years. I've used Zoom for years. I own a lot of more products of individual mini pedals. But the Line 6 effects were clearly ahead above the Mooer. So if that matters to you, it's a big difference. I mean, you're going to be doing a lot of work to get around that. The Zoom effects, I love the Zoom effects. I love them. I tweak the living hell out of them. I have backups in the app, in the Gadwin Tone Lib, in their app. I can do virtually anything I want to do in a Zoom. And sure, some of them may sound clinical to you right up front, but believe me, just tweak a little bit. Just tweak a little bit. Use all the parameters they give you and use some EQ judiciously in those Zoom units and you'll be surprised. So Podgo, Zoom, Mooer as far as effects. Just being honest. Not saying I'm not going to use them. They just really weren't great. So, but again, the Mooer, you get way more effects. You get a synth engine, if that's important to you. You can have a comp, you can have effect A slot, you can have distortion overdrive, you can have the effects loop, you can have the tone capture as its own slot. And I'll get to that in a second because it took a lot of work to get that to work for me for what I wanted it to do, but I finally figured it out. Distortion overdrive, effect slot B, amp cab, delay reverb, blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot in there. You only get, I think, 6 in Podgo, or 7, including the included ones, and I think you get up to 11, I think. Is it 11? So 1, 2, 3, 4. It's at least 11 with the Mooer. And depending on which zoom you get, if you get the G3Xn, that's 7, and then there's a 9, and then there's an 11 effect version of the big board. But again, at different price points, so it's really hard. That's why I'm comparing them on sound and features and not like putting one up against the other. Like it's more, okay, what does line 6, what does Zoom offer, what does Mooer offer in each category for me? And then you can make your decision based on price. The app. All right, the Zoom app, told you. I love it, it's easy to use, it works great. You can back up from there. The Gadwin Tone Lib ad is amazing as well, which is a free download. It works flawlessly, but I've never had a problem with the Zoom app either. You can move effects around in the chain with the app. It's just genius. I love it. It's crisp, it's clear, it works. It's never failed me. Boom, double thumbs up for that. The Podgo app is really a step above. I mean, the Line 6 applications for Helix, HXFX, HX Stomp, and Podgo Edit has its own Podgo Edit. But they all work the same. They're all the same typography and the same basic software. They are crystal clear, easy to use, work flawlessly, and give you endless options to tweak your units. Moving effects around. Well, in the Podgo, you can only move, you can put a few things, excuse me, in different places, but in the other units by Line 6, you can kind of run amok. The one thing about the Mooer that's interesting is it's really competing with the Helix or the Helix LT, but yet there's no second, maybe you know, like maybe you don't know. But in the Helix, you can get like parallel chains going. And the Helix is a dual shark chip. You can't do that in the Mooer. So I found that to be interesting. Maybe that's where some of the savings comes. But again, that's why you can't do apples. It's apples to oranges. You can't do a side-by-side, complete, utter comparison. The Mooer app kind of sucks. So here's my little trial and tribulation with the Mooer app. So got the Mooer unit. I bought it. First thing you do, is check the firmware. Firmware was very old in the unit I got. Updated the firmware. The software I had downloaded from Mooer's site, the latest software and the latest firmware and the latest drivers. Download them, installed them, connected a cable, USB cable 2.0. Boom, it saw the Mooer, it updated the firmware. Great, right? Wrong. The next time I tried to open their own Mooer Studio software that works like the Zoom and the Line 6 software, does not recognize the unit. And it said, maybe reinstalling the software will fix this. Well, I reinstalled about 20 times, uninstalled, reinstalled, uninstalled, reinstalled, rebooted. This went on for 2 days. Very frustrating. In the meantime, I worked on the unit and dialed in some sounds, but I couldn't do everything. I couldn't do the tone capture I'm about to talk about. You couldn't, there's certain applications that are really hard to do. So Finally, I asked questions on forums. I wrote to Mooer. They were useless. Still haven't heard back from them. And then I said, wait a second. I've done enough gear in my life that why don't we try this? I even talked to guys who had done YouTube tutorials. I sent them emails and asked them. Nobody knew. I said, why don't we do this? Why don't we uninstall the latest software? I've already got the firmware up, installed. Let's go back to the software before this software, which was from last year, but it was the last one before the latest. Install that. Boom. Installed it. Great. Plugged in the machine, recognized the machine and said, but your firmware and the software are incompatible. Okay. So then I said, now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the new software and we're going to install that right over the old software. So whatever's already been installed, it's just updating to the new firmware. Boom. Boom. It worked. Finally, I was able to import presets that other people had made. Yes, I went out and bought presets. I've bought presets for the Line 6, and I haven't bought any for the Zoom because I've, pretty much got that dialed in. But I went out and bought presets for the Line 6 and for the Mooer, and couldn't import them into the Mooer. But now I could import them, check them out what other people were doing, see the sounds they were going, how they went about it. Awesome. So then it finally worked. However, the software itself kind of blows. If you put the Mooer, go watch some other tutorials, watch the Mooer software on the screen versus, and then watch the Line 6 software or the Zoom software. It's like child's play, right? It's like a child designed this, as like a school project, the Mooer software compared to Line 6 and even Zoom. It's just bad. It crashes randomly, but it allows me to move things a little bit more easily and fine tune a few things and back up, restore, etc., etc. Tone capture. Let's just get to that real quick before we go to a summary of the whole thing, because I don't want to blather on forever and waste your time, but I'm trying to give you a good idea of what you're in for. So, tone capture was the most frustrating thing on the Mooer after the software, getting that to work. Why is that? Well, tone capture, what it does is you put it after your effects loop. So if your effects loop is later in your chain, move it up for this purpose. Put it before the tone capture and have the tone capture after your overdrive distortion if you're modeling a stomp box. If you're modeling a guitar, it's a different process, but you can actually model different guitars. You can, I did it. That part, that worked, right? I modeled an Esquire, worked great. Sounded just like the Esquire. You have to tweak things a little bit, but that's because it's sampling it, and they do give you an EQ and a volume level output that you can tweak. But stomp boxes are a whole nother thing. Now, I understand that that's trickier, but I tried over 20 times to model a fuzz. It was a simple 108 fuzz, right? Like your classic BC 108 fuzz. Nope. Nope. No matter how many times I did it, no matter how many people I asked, no matter how many tutorials I watched, I was doing it right and it wasn't working. So there's going to be certain things it's not going to work on. How do I know that? Well, because I finally said, wait, before I give up on this thing, I've got this Thundering Herd distortion from Brian Menatone, from Menatone Pedals, and I really love it. And if I was running an overdrive in the Mooer before that, it would get pretty fuzzy. So let me try that, right? Maybe a distortion is easier, simpler to do. First crack. Boom. Not exact. You're not going to get exact 101%. You're going to get like 90%, and then you tweak it a little bit with the EQ and the volume, and then you maybe get it to like 95%. But 95% is pretty good when you're modeling a pedal that you're just capturing into the unit. So I do have to give Mooer a thumbs up for that, because I ran out of slots to put a fuzz in, right? Because you only have one OD distortion slot on the Mooer, even though I think probably maybe the second effect slot I could have done it, but I had already used that for either tremolo or pitch. So to me, this was a big deal. So now with the tone capture slot, I had my favorite distortion sounding pretty much 95% of the way there. Not 100%, but 95% of the way there. And that was good enough on a modeling board. And it didn't matter because I'm not, yeah, would I love it to be the thundering herd from Menatone precisely? But it's not, and it's never gonna be. But did it sound great in the chain the way I was using it? Yes, and that's what I was going for anyway. I wanted a really good sounding distortion of my choice there, and this got me almost all the way there, and certainly like good enough that no one's gonna know the difference. So that was the end of my frustrations with the Mooer, but I still like it. I still like it a lot. Again, I'm looking down to see, make sure I'm not missing anything. But anyway, enough jibber jabber. So it really depends, again, on how much money you want to spend. If you want more than 7 effects and great amps and all that, right, you know, get the HX Stomp. Or if you really need more effects and more slots like the Mooer, get the Helix LT or the flagship Helix. But if you only need, like, you know, you're stuck with the wah, like you have a wah in the Pod Go, but you do get an overdrive and all the tweakability and all that, and you get other effects, and you can put things where you want in the chain. Like, even though you're always going to have an EQ block, you can put it wherever you want. Same thing with compression and everything else. Like, I didn't find I was running out of stuff in the Pod Go. Certainly cool to have, like, I always like to have a ring mod because I like to play, there's a certain frequency in the wah when you're playing off of a ring mod that gets you this crazy oscillation that I like to use when I'm playing slide guitar. So that's nice to have. It's nice to have the pitch whammy. And by the way, on the Mooer, I think it's like this on some of the upper line 6 models, but if you're going to use the pitch wham and you've already got your expression assigned to wah, you can put it into expression input 2. So I put another expression pedal into expression input 2. So now when I click on pitch wham on the Mooer, expression pedal 2 controls the pitch on that. That I love. I loved that, and I love that part about the Line 6 products as well. So, you know, to recap, the Line 6 effects are a little better. They're a lot better. The effects are a lot better. Even the Zoom are better than the Mooer. The amps are really, really close in the Mooer and the Line 6. The stock Line 6 cabs are better. It's easier to import IRs, like, say, Celestian or whoever you're buying your IRs from, into the Line 6. More has to be tone captured. Believe me, I tried. I was praying when I got that app working that it was just going to import IRs. No. And the Zoom does IRs too. I didn't import any, I'm being honest with you, but that's because I know what IRs I like, and I would just bring them into sounds I already made. So effects, effects Line 6 get the nod. Amps, really close. Cabs, Line 6. If you're not caring about accuracy with amps and cabs, you can get great amp sounds with the Zoom. Just don't be thinking, oh, I'm going for, a plexi or something. You could probably get that sound. You might not get it the way you expect. You might, but I found that they were like not as accurate out of the box, but great sounding nonetheless. Ease of use. I think line 6 wins over both Zoom and Mooer. It's less frustrating. The app, duh, there's no brainer there. It's not that the Mooer app isn't usable. It is. It's just pretty horrible. It works. It works, but it's pretty horrible. The sound, by the way, the sound of all, I would say that the line 6 and the Mooer, when you get them sounding where you want, I'm just talking the boxes themselves. Not the amps, not the effects, the boxes sound really great. The Zoom might sound a little less great, but I mean, it's a really small margin, which again is why this comes down to price. So I know this is long-winded, but I wanted you to have an honest, unvarnished opinion from someone who played all these things and sat here and watched hundreds of hours of tutorials so that you don't have to, but you're gonna anyway. I know. That's why I'm here. That's why we talk about these things. And anyway, I love apps, so apps make the world go round with this kind of stuff. So that's kind of a big deal. But I'm happy with any of them. I think if money wasn't an option, I'd probably go Helix. If less effects, but the most useful ones were cool with you, like your basic stuff that Pod Go has, I would go with the Pod Go. If you need more effects, despite how they sound, and you're confident you're going to make them sound better, or they're just, you need that more than anything else, is just having more, again, no pun intended, then the Mooer is probably for you. The Mooer is built like a brick, you know what? It's steel. It's really impressive. I mean, they're all three impressive. Again, price, performance, and what you need out of your sound for your rig. I hope I covered all that. I hope that gives you some kind of perspective, and sorry you had to watch this whole thing, but it was the only way to communicate all this stuff. Like if I wrote this down, it would be like a novel. But they're all three good units. I know there's even more units out there I haven't tried. As I mentioned in the beginning, I love the Strymon Iridium, but that's just, amps and cab simulation without effects. So if you have any other questions that I didn't cover because I forgot or just didn't want to bore you anymore, please post below and I will answer them promptly and hopefully help you make the best decision for your money.